Thanks, Pippa. It's good to see so many of you. My name's Phil and I'm an Assessment Group Manager. I'm responsible for Preliminary for Schools exams. To start, I'd like to give you some information about Cambridge English Language Assessment. Cambridge English Language Assessment was established over 100 years ago. We are an international exams group and a not-for-profit organisation. We're a department of Cambridge University, comprising 3 exam boards as well as the largest research capability of its kind. We advise governments and NGOs and we partner industry leaders to deliver the best products and services. Cambridge English Language Assessment has around 4 million candidates from all around the world. There are over 2,700 centres in 130 countries with approximately 20,000 examiners. I'll now pass you over to Rachel Harding, who is an external consultant for Cambridge English Language Assessment.
Thanks, Phil. The aim of this webinar is to look at the Cambridge English Key for Schools and Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools exams. We'll look at the format and task types and some classroom ideas that will help prepare your students for these exams. Each of these exams tests all 4 skills: reading, writing, listening and speaking. In Key for Schools, there is a reading and writing test which takes 1 hour 10 minutes, and there is a listening test which takes about 30 minutes. The speaking test takes about 8 to 10 minutes. In Preliminary for Schools, there is a reading and writing test which takes 1 hour 30 minutes, and there is a listening test which takes about 30 minutes. The speaking test takes about 10 to 12 minutes. We'll start by having a look at the Cambridge English Key for Schools listening paper. There are 5 tasks for Key for Schools listening. The first is a 3-option multiple choice in which candidates listen for key information in 5 short recordings. The second task is a matching task. Here's an example of this task. In this particular task, students have to listen to a dialogue between a boy and his friend. The boy talks about the presents he got from different people for his birthday. Students need to listen to the recording and match each person to the present they bought. If you are doing a task like this in class, you can help learners prepare by asking them to think about the topic. For example, you could ask your learners which present from the list they would prefer, or you could ask them what kind of presents their family members give them. The third task is another 3-option multiple choice task, but this time candidates listen to a longer dialogue. For this task, all the information that candidates need to answer the questions is given by just one of the speakers. The fourth listening task is a gap fill or note-taking task. Candidates listen to a dialogue and write down key information like names, places and telephone numbers. The 5th task is another note-taking task, but this time candidates listen to a monologue. Here's an example. These tasks can be about a number of different topics, so make sure your learners look carefully at the task to see what it's about. As you can see, this one's about a new quiz show on the TV. Now let's look at preliminary for schools listening. There are 4 tasks in this test. In listening part 1, there are 7 short recordings taken from daily life. These may be conversations at home or between friends, radio announcements, parts of talks, exchanges in shops, etc. For each recording there is a question and 3 pictures, like this. Candidates have to listen to the recording and choose the picture which best answers the question. In this question, the listening is about what the boy bought from the shops. What words do you expect to hear in the listening? Write your ideas in the text chat now. Okay, lots of you saying newspaper, football, some people saying, so the topic, yeah, could. So you've said newspaper, book and magazine and other words like football. So in fact, they are all in the listening. It can help learners prepare if you ask them to think about what they will hear before they listen. So remember, these pictures are there to help the learners. After that, candidates, in part 2, candidates listen to a longer monologue or interview. There are then 6 multiple choice questions to answer. Then, in part 3, candidates also listen to a longer recording giving information about places or events. On the question paper, there is a page of notes summarising the content of the recording. 6 pieces of information are missing from the notes, and candidates have to write the missing information in the numbered gaps. As you can see, the task on the screen is about a filmmaking competition. Finally, the recording for part 4 is an informal conversation between 2 people about everyday topics. The 2 people talk about their opinions and agree or disagree on certain points. In the task, there are 6 statements, and candidates have to decide whether each statement is true or false. So now, let's look at some ways you can help your students. Here are some ideas. It helps to do lots of listening practice with your students. You can use the recordings that go with your course book and also sample papers and sound files from our website. This is an example of a computer-based listening test that we have available on our website. It's good to let students practice doing sample papers, as it can help them become more familiar with the format of the exam. Another way to help your learners with the listening is to give them lots of opportunities to listen to authentic materials. You'll need to choose things that are suitable for their level, but they could listen to songs or films, for example. What other authentic material could your learners listen to? Do you have any other ideas? Write some ideas in the chat box now. Presentation, very good. Yeah, interviews. Okay, great. So lots of really good ideas there. You can find suitable things on the internet or on TV. There are lots of websites which give materials for learners, especially news sites. You're probably using a lot of those already. It's also useful to work on strategies that can help your students in a listening exam. So let's look at an exam task now and think about how you can use it to develop your learners' listening strategies. This is the rubric or instructions from a Part 3 preliminary listening task. You could give your students just these instructions before they do the task. As you can see, they say, you will hear some information about a filmmaking competition. So, ask your students what kind of information they expect to hear. Imagine you are a student now. What kind of information would you expect to hear about a filmmaking competition? Write your ideas in the chat box. That's great. Lots of ideas. For example, closing date, prizes, judges. After you've done this, you can show your learners the task and they can see whether any of their predictions are correct. You can help them do more prediction by asking them to think about the kinds of answers they are listening for. For instance, in the first example, it asks about the maximum length of time. So you can elicit from your students that this answer might require the words minutes or hours. Let's look at the script for the task we've just looked at now. Which word is about time? Type your ideas in the chat box. not even ideas, answers. Yes, a lot of you have got minutes there. It says minutes, and so the answer is actually 12 minutes in the script. When students do this as a listening task, they might choose the wrong answer. What answer do you think they might choose that is incorrect? So we've got different numbers coming up here, like 11, 18, 3, and 8. Okay, so that's very well highlighted there. There's 4 different numbers that they could actually choose, which are incorrect. So if your learners are likely to choose an incorrect answer like this, you can really help them by showing them the tape script and doing this kind of activity. So, listening with a printed script makes students more confident in the early stages of exam preparation. You can help them by focusing on where the answers come in the script, show them why an answer is correct, and point out the distraction. This is where something is mentioned that students might think is correct but isn't, like we've just done. You can also use the script to compare the wording in the recording with the question paper options. So in fact there are many things you can do with just one small part of a task. Now let's look at the Cambridge English Key for Schools reading task types. There are 5 reading tasks. The first is a matching exercise, like this one. In the actual exam there are 5 questions on the left and 8 notices on the right, A to H. For the purposes of this webinar, let's look at sentence 5, you cannot go in through here. Which notice should the candidate choose? So look at the 4 notices on the right, and please use your polling buttons to choose the answer. Is it A, B, C or D? So a lot of you are typing into the chat box. Can you find your polling button and just choose the correct answer, A, B, C or D? We'll just wait. Okay, so the majority here got A of the people that chose the answer from the polling button. So it does help us. Most of you got the right answer there, and I can see it coming in the chat box. But if you can click on your polling button, it's better to see what answers everyone's choosing. But that's right, the answer is A, no entrance to art room, use other door. The second task in the reading test is a 3-option multiple choice. And the third task is a 3-option multiple choice and matching. Here's the first part of a part 3 for you to look at. For each 2-line dialogue, the candidates have to select the correct response from the 3 options they are given. So if you look at question 11, a person says, "Why didn't you come to the pool yesterday?" What do you think is the best answer from those options A to C? Please try now to use your polling buttons to choose the answer. Is it A, B or C? Just wait for a minute for those answers to come through. Okay, and so everyone chose, that's too easy, that question, I think. Everyone chose the correct answer there. Why didn't you come to the pool yesterday? C, I was doing something else. Here's the second task in part 3. In this task, candidates have to look at the dialogue on the left and match the correct sentences to the gaps. Part 4 is a right, wrong, doesn't say task, or a 3-option multiple choice task. So there's a choice of tasks that might be in the test. And the last task is a multiple choice close. So let's move on now to look at the reading tasks in the Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools. There are 5 tasks covering a range of skills. In the first part of the reading paper, candidates have to read and understand different kinds of short texts, like notices on a school notice board or text messages. In part 2, candidates have to match 5 descriptions of people to things that are suitable for them. The topic could be holidays, TV programmes, websites, books, etc. Here's an example of 2 descriptions of people. We're not going to read them now, but you can find them in the handbook on our website. For this task, you have to match the descriptions of people to the teen magazines that would be best for them to read. Remember that in class it is good to personalise tasks. For example, here you could ask your learners to choose the magazine that they would buy and ask them to explain why. So look at these 2 magazines now. Which one do you think your students would like most? Choose A or B on your polling buttons now, and we'll see which is the best magazine. So choose A or B with your polling buttons, if you can remember where they are. There's lots of B's coming through there on the chat box. Okay, and B is the winner there. So Teens Now is the best magazine for your students, or most people's students. Obviously there's no correct answer when you do an activity like this, but it's useful practice to ask your learners to do this and then to explain the reasons for their choice. In part 3, candidates have to read a longer factual text and look for precise information. There are 10 sentences about the text and they have to decide whether each sentence is true or false. In part 4, the text expresses opinion or attitude. There are 5 4-option multiple choice questions for candidates to answer. Finally, in part 5, there is a short text with 10 numbered gaps. For each gap, candidates have to choose the correct answer from 4 options. Here, the test focuses mainly on vocabulary, but grammatical points such as pronouns, modal verbs, connectives and prepositions are also tested. You can see examples of all of these tasks in the Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools Handbook, which is available on our website. Now, let's focus again on classroom preparation. A good way to help readers practice their reading skills is to encourage your learners to look for authentic texts. A good place to find authentic text is in magazines. Where else can you find authentic texts that your learners might be interested in? Type your ideas into the chat box. Okay, so we've got good things coming up here like short stories, novels. You obviously need to think about the level, sports magazines, the BBC. Graded readers. Okay, so somebody is thinking there about the level. So lots of great ideas. There's also tourist brochures, instructions and recipes, things that might interest your learners. So it's good to work with texts that your learners have found because it can be more motivating for them. So what about the challenges of using authentic texts? What problems could there be? Again, type your ideas into the chat box. So what problems do you think? We've talked about a few, about the level, what other vocabulary, difficult words. Okay, so everyone got lots of good ideas there. A lot of you have said that the language might be too difficult and the texts might be too long. If there is new language, you can either simplify the texts or you can give your learners strategies for dealing with new words by showing them how to guess the meaning of a new word from its context. Another useful thing to do is to find short texts on the internet on topics that are of particular interest to your students, like films or computer games. Or you can find materials from different course books. You may again need to edit text to the right level by simplifying grammar, taking out any difficult vocabulary and rewording some of the information. Then you can use the text in class and your students will be more interested because the topic has been chosen for them. You can also work on reading strategies. For example, encouraging learners not to worry about understanding every word. What other reading strategies would you help your learners with? Can you again type your ideas into the chat box? So encouraging them to read a bit faster, not understand every word. Just scroll down. There's lots of ideas here, so it's hard. Skimming and scanning, highlighting new words, reading for gist. Great. Lots of good ideas. Before an exam or a test, you can help your learners to be more prepared by showing them the kinds of tasks they will have in the real exam. But there are lots of other ways to improve reading skills. Here's an example of a fun way to prepare your learners. This is one of our apps that you can find on our website. It's a game called Monkey Puzzles, and in this part of the game you need to match the word and the pictures. This game is aimed at pre-A1 to A2, so it's suitable for learners who are doing Key for Schools. Here's another game. This one is suitable for A2 and B1 learners. In this game you have to press stop when you see the correct word for the sentence. So if you can see, it's a Ferris wheel there at a fun fair, and you need to stop when you see the correct word. So as you can see, the sentence is "come in blank because the baby's sleeping." So is the answer really, quietly, loudly, or badly? And you can choose again, you can use your, I think we're going to, you can just type that into the text box. Yes, loads of you have got quietly there. Obviously we're not going to come in loudly if there's a baby sleeping, so that's right. These games are all on our website, and you can see which language level each game is aimed at before you play. Now let's move on to look at the Cambridge English Key for Schools writing. In this section there are 4 tasks altogether, testing simple writing skills. In part 6, candidates have to spell certain topic words correctly. And in part 7, they have to write one word in each of 10 spaces in a text. Here's an example of a part 7 task. So I'll give you a few seconds to look at this message and tell me what is the missing word for question number 41. Okay, it's a bit of a race against time, but we think Bryn Parry says have. I think he was the first one. So yes, the correct answer is have. I have 2 brothers, Emilio and Miguel. Moving on to part 8, this requires candidates to read 2 short texts, an advert and an email, and then copy important information from these texts into some notes. Here's an example of a part 8 task. So you can see here that there's an advert for an ice skating party and an email from a friend to Louisa. So the candidate has to imagine that they are Louisa, the person taking the notes, and they have to write notes about what they have to do. They have to look at both the advert and the email in order to get all of the answers. And finally, part 9 is a short communicative message of 25 to 35 words, where candidates need to include 3 different content points. Here's an example of this task. So have a quick look at the task and tell me which 3 content points, so those are important points, that candidates must include in their answer. Which 3 points do they need to include in their email back? Okay, Yeah, lots of you, some are quicker than others. Maybe it's what part of the world you're in. We've got a delay. Okay, but it's the time, the DVD and the food that you need to include in your answer. That's correct. So let's move on to look at some classroom ideas. As you've seen, correct spelling is important in the exam, so try to make spelling fun with activities like jumbled words and simple games such as Hangman. Also, make spelling competitive. Students will have a purpose for spelling something correctly to gain points for their team. You can make games to help learners practice particular parts of the exam. For example, for part 6, you can make definitions which they need to identify. So here is a definition for you. What is a live online educational presentation during which participating viewers can submit questions and comments? What word is this a definition of? Please type your answers into the chat box. Smiley face there. Yes, very good. The answer is webinar, which is the common name for an online seminar with participants joining in. Of course, this is not a word that your students would be expected to know, but you can make similar word games using the vocabulary lists on your website, on our website, sorry. And there are a number of ways you can prepare your students for part 6 of the Cambridge Key Reading, in which candidates have to find the words that relate to definitions they are given. Here's an example. They can see the first letter of the word and how long it is, and in this case they have to write the word camera, which I'm sure lots of you are writing in there. The skill of giving and understanding definitions is a useful one. It can be used to revise words worked on in class, or for games where the definitions can be provided by either the teacher or the students. Have you got other suggestions for word games? If you have, please write them in the chat box. I'm sure lots of you do word games in class. Bingo, guess the word by miming, crosswords. Lots and lots of ideas coming. Yeah, so that's great. If you go to our website, you can also find our picture banks and make your own games. You could cut up the pictures and the words and play Pelmanism, where you match the word to the picture. What other games could you play with pictures like these? Please type your ideas into the chat box now. Obviously, pictures are really good for younger learners, and so we've got memory games, role play, spelling bee, making up a story with the cards. So lots of great ideas there. These pictures are from our starters picture bank. You can use more difficult words with your students if they are taking key or preliminary. Remember, there are vocabulary lists on our website, so you can get a clearer idea of the kinds of words that learners will be expected to know at these levels. Let's move on to look at preliminary writing now. The writing section of paper 1 has 3 parts. It's important to remember that the 3 writing tasks are worth as many marks in total as the 5 reading tasks. The writing test carries 25% of the marks for the whole exam. In part 1 of the writing test, there are 5 sentence transformations. Now let's take a quick look at a sentence transformation from the exam. For each question, there is one sentence which is complete and a second sentence which has a word or words missing. Candidates have to complete the second sentence with between 1 and 3 words so that it means the same as the first sentence. All 5 sentences share a common theme or topic. Here's one for you to try. If you look at question 1 here, can you write between 1 and 3 words in the chat box to complete the sentence, the second sentence, so that it means the same as the first one? So what is the missing word or words for that sentence? And a lot of you, I can see, are writing in the correct answer there. It's just one word missing, showed. So Nico's older brother showed him how to play. Can't see that, but that's correct. So only one word was needed in this example, but in other sentences, up to 3 words may be needed. In part 2, candidates have to write a short communicative message of between 35 and 45 words. The instructions in the question tell them who they are writing to and why they are writing. There are also 3 bullet points which tell them what they must include in their answer. In part 3, the final part of the paper, candidates have to choose between writing an informal letter or a short story, using around 100 words. This is worth 15 marks out of the total 25 for the writing section. For the letter writing task, candidates have to read an extract of a letter from a friend and then write a reply. For the story writing task, candidates are given either a short title or the first sentence of the story. This is an example of a writing part 3 letter. You can find it in the Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools Handbook 2012 edition. Here's an idea for practicing the task. Divide your class into groups of 3 or 4 and give each group a copy of the task. Ask the students to work together in their groups to plan and then write a reply. They need to think about the vocabulary they will use and try to use a range of grammatical structures. Remind them that their reply should be about 100 words long. When they have finished, pass the replies round so that each group gets to read the replies from all of the groups. Ask the groups to decide which reply was the best and give reasons for their decision. I'm sure you've got lots of other ideas that you could do which are similar. But here are 2 more ideas for helping prepare students for the Preliminary for Schools Part 3 letter writing task. Prepare a model answer for a task in the sample paper and then gap some of the words. Students discuss in pairs how to complete the answer. Look at sample answers to a task that you can find on the Cambridge English Language Assessment website. Discuss what is good about the answers and also if and how they could be improved. So remember, there's lots and lots of material on the website you can use. Of course, another way to help learners is to get them to write to other learners. If you would like to connect to other schools, then you can sign up for Cambridge English Pen Friends. This is a free activity for your school and it will give your learners the opportunity to practice what they have learnt. You can sign up and connect with another school and then send each other cards or e-cards. We'll send you the web address for this and all the other sites after the webinar. Now let's move on to the Key for Schools speaking test. Candidates take the exam in pairs and there are also 2 examiners. One of the examiners speaks to the candidates and runs the test. The other listens and assesses the candidate's performance. The test takes 8 to 10 minutes. In part 1, the examiner asks each candidate in turn a few questions of a factual, personal kind. So what kind of things do you expect students to be asked about in part 1? Type your ideas into the chat box. Name, hobbies, age, likes and dislikes, school subjects. Have you got any brothers and sisters? That's right, exactly what I was thinking and what is in the exam. So it's things like name, country, age, family, likes and dislikes. Typical questions might be what's your name, how do you spell it, and as someone just wrote there, have you got any brothers or sisters? So you're reading our minds here. In part 2, the 2 candidates interact with each other and are given a kind of information gap activity. Here's an example of a task. It's about a skateboarding competition. The examiner gives the card on the left to candidate A and the one on the right to candidate B. The examiner tells candidate B to ask about the skateboarding competition and candidate A to answer their questions. So now let's look at the preliminary for schools speaking test. In this speaking test, students are examined in pairs again, and as with Key for Schools, there are two examiners. One of them, the interlocutor, speaks to the candidates and runs the test. The other listens and assesses the candidate's performance. The test takes 10 to 12 minutes and is in 4 parts. Part 1 is similar to Key for Schools, but a little more stretching. Typical questions might be, do you study English at school? Do you like it? Tell us about your English teacher. What is your favourite subject at school? So very similar to KET, but just slightly more difficult. In part 2, the two candidates talk together, not with the interlocutor. Here's an example of the exam task. The interlocutor shows the candidates the pictures you can see on the slide and says, I'm going to describe a situation to you. A boy is leaving his school because his parents are going to work in another country. The students in his class want to give him a present. Talk together about the different presents they could give him and then decide which would be best. Here is a picture with some ideas to help you. The pictures are intended as prompts to help candidates think of ideas. There is no right answer to the task. Candidates are being assessed on their language ability and not their ideas. In part 3, each candidate has a different photograph on the same topic to describe. For example, they might have 2 photographs showing different types of leisure activities. And in part 4, candidates are asked questions relating to the theme of the photographs they had in part 3. For example, they may be asked about the leisure activities that they like doing. So now I'd like you to think about what examiners might be looking for in the speaking tests. For example, examiners are probably looking for good use of vocabulary. What else do you think they are looking for? Type your ideas into the chat box. Fluency, okay. Pronunciation, I saw, okay. So I'll show you the assessment criteria now and you can see if they're the same things that you thought of. Here they are. Examiners will be looking for all of these things. They include interactive communication. For example, a candidate who does not let his or her partner speak will be penalised. Can you look at the rest of the criteria and tell me what is assessed at preliminary for schools but not at Key for Schools? Okay, it's quite an easy question, that one, but yes, you're right, it's discourse management. In preliminary for schools, candidates are expected to talk for about a minute in part 3, so the examiners can assess how good candidates are at managing discourse. If you want to learn more about the speaking tests, you can look at our speaking test videos. These are on our YouTube channel. You can watch a video of candidates taking a test. And also you can read the examiner's comments about each candidate's performance. So there's lots of material there on YouTube. Here's an idea to help your students prepare for the preliminary speaking exam. Let your students prepare their own test. Students can then administer their test to each other and comment on each other's performance. This can help to raise awareness of the format of the test and the assessment criteria that are used. Are there any other activities that you have found useful for helping your students with speaking? Type them into the chat box. So So what other speaking activities have you used with your students to prepare them for the exam? Drama, role plays, so you could role play a test scenario. Encouraging people to speak to people they don't know, so that would help practice part 1 of the test. And pros and cons on a subject, so that would help with the part 4 when they develop an idea. So there's lots of good ideas there. So thank you for attending the webinar. In the last 45 minutes we've looked at the Cambridge English Key for Schools and Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools exams. We've also looked at some ideas for you to use in your classes to help prepare your students. Now we'd like to answer any questions you have for us. Okay, well thank you for all your questions and we'll try our hardest to answer them. So first of all, we've got a question here about why in the multiple choice there are 3 options instead of 4.
Yeah, I mean, it's to do with the level of difficulty of the test. Basically, at KET, Key and Preliminary, it tends to be 3 options because that makes it a little bit easier for the candidates, obviously. As you move up the levels to FCE, you get some questions 3, some questions 4, and then as you move up to Advanced, I think they're all 4 there. So it just makes them a little bit easier or a little bit more difficult in order to get the correct level for each test, really.
Okay, that's great. And there's another question here was about why have the picture prompts in the speaking have they been replaced by word prompts?
Yeah, this is if you're involved in teaching for First for Schools. There's a revised exam starting in January, and in the speaking part of the First for Schools, then some of the pictures have been replaced by word cues, as you say, but there has been no change in Preliminary or Key as yet. It's something that will be coming in about 3 or 4 years' time. So at the moment there's been no change and you still have the picture cues there, but it may be something that when we revise the new look of the exams that may come in. We don't know yet. We're at the early stages of discussing what changes might be made in the next revision, which I think is due 2019.
Okay, quite a long time off, but
yeah,
lots
but
of time
we start
planning.
we start planning it now because we have to test it out on people.
Somebody's asked a question about which book is recommended for their students for the exam. As we said, there's lots of material on the website, official material that is produced by Cambridge English, and also Cambridge University Press, I believe, produce a lot of books which are the official exam preparation material as well. So there's lots of material that you can use.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of publishers do have practice test materials, but we do work with Cambridge University Press, and so we link together quite well with them. But it's not to say that other publishers also don't have good materials. Also, we can't really recommend one particular book because there are new books coming out all the time, and you may find that that your style of teaching or your style of students suits one course book more than another. So it's not really easy for us to say this is the best one, this one's not so good, etc.
Okay, and there's a question here about the marks. Can you give me the exact mark for each part of the test? And I think that is talking about the breakdown of the percentage of for the skills, for the different skills. So
yeah, so I mean, for the 4 different skills at Preliminary, they're divided up into exactly quarters. So you have 25% for the reading, 25% for the writing, 25% for the listening, and 25% for the speaking. So although there are different marks available each part, they're weighted so that in the end they come out equally.
Okay, brilliant. And let's just have a quick look, see if there's anything else coming in here.
There's a question here about whether it would be possible to have a webinar about the CB version of the test. I don't think that's particularly anything we've particularly thought of, because although the test is taken in a different way, the questions are pretty much the same. You do the same questions just in different formats. So I'm not sure that there would be any great advantage to do a particular webinar, but if there's a demand for it, it's something that we might think of doing. At the moment, there is no speaking CB test. That's still done in the same face-to-face as the if you're not taking a CB test. So, you know, that would be something that, if that was introduced, would have to be done obviously in a different way. And if and when that becomes part of the test, then it may be worth, you know, looking at how to prepare people specifically for the CB test. But I think really in the other parts of the exam, there's the differences between taking the PB and the CB are not large enough really.
There's a question here about if unclear handwriting affects people in the writing part of the exam.
Depends really what you mean by unclear. The candidates are not marked on how nice their handwriting is. You know, that would be a bit unfair because some people obviously have better handwriting than others. But it does have to be legible, and if the examiner genuinely, you know, and they do make every effort to try and read what is put, but if the examiner cannot read it, then they cannot give any score for it. So you do need to make sure that your students, you know, are careful about the way they write. You know, you may need to ask them, if you can see that they've got pretty poor handwriting, that they need to slow down and write clearly, because in the end it's not really up to us to find out what the person was trying to say. If we can't read it, it's fair to say that then it's not good writing, because if nobody, you know, if they were going for a job and somebody can't read their handwriting, that's not a lot of use either. So, you know, they do need to be able to write legibly. If their handwriting's that poor, it might be worth them thinking of the CB test, because that's done obviously on a keyboard, which will help a lot.
Good suggestion. Okay, that's all the questions we've got time for. Thank you very much for asking some really interesting questions. I hope you found this webinar useful. The next webinar coming up is on Cambridge English Proficiency Writing Part 1. Thanks very much.
Thank you.